The massive space station called Unity floated in the darkness between three star systems like a giant metal flower. Its silver walls stretched for miles in every direction, and thousands of lights blinked across its surface like tiny stars. The station had been built by 7 different alien races working together, and it showed in the strange mix of curves and angles that made up its design. Some parts looked like flowing water, while others were sharp and military inside the Great Hall. Kim Tae-ho sat at a small table made of earth oak wood. The table looked tiny compared to the huge alien furniture around it, but that was exactly how he wanted it. The 47 different alien species in the room all had their own ideas about what furniture should look like. Some sat on crystal formations that grew from the floor, others floated in bubbles of purple gas, and a few hung upside down from the ceiling like metal bats. Kim Tae-ho was a quiet man with gray eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore a simple black suit that his wife had pressed for him before he left Earth 3 months ago. The suit was nothing special, but it was clean and comfortable, and it made him feel like he was carrying a piece of home with him. The other diplomats wore amazing things: crystal armor that changed colors, robes made of living light, metal exoskeletons that hummed with power. But Kim Tae-ho just sat in his Earth suit and watched everything with those calm gray eyes. Behind him stood Park So-young, a young woman in a dark blue military uniform. She was 26 years old, and this was her first time off Earth. Everything about the aliens fascinated her, but she kept her face serious and professional. Her hand stayed near her weapon, not because she expected trouble, but because that was what her training had taught her to do. She had short black hair and quick dark eyes that missed nothing. The biggest alien in the room was General Vextar of the Kreth Empire. He was 7 feet tall, with scales that looked like black hole and eyes that glowed red like hot coals. His people were warriors who had been fighting across the galaxy for thousands of years. They conquered planets the way humans collected stamps, and they were very good at it. The general wore armor made from the bones of creatures he had killed in personal combat, and every piece told a story of victory. The Kreth had been expanding their empire for the last 50 years. They would arrive at a planet with their war fleets and give the people living there 2 choices: surrender or die. Most species chose to surrender. The few who fought back usually regretted it very quickly. The Kreth were not cruel for the sake of being cruel, but they believed that strength was the only thing that mattered in the universe. If you were weak, you deserved to be conquered. Around the Great Hall sat representatives from dozens of other species. The Alari looked like living crystals that sang instead of talking. Their music was beautiful, but it took special computers to translate their songs into words. The Hive Queen of the Insect Collective was a massive creature with 1,000 eyes, and she spoke through smaller versions of herself that scurried around the room like living phones. The Aquatic Federation sent beings that looked like jellyfish floating in tanks of pink water, and the Synthetic Collective had robots that changed shape every few minutes as if they could not decide what they wanted to look like. Kim Tae-ho had been studying all of these species for years. He knew their languages, their customs, their fears, and their dreams. He knew that the Alari were terrified of loud noises because it could shatter their crystal bodies. He knew that the Hive Queen was actually thousands of individual minds working together, and sometimes they disagreed with each other. He knew that the Aquatic Federation could not survive outside their special water for more than an hour. And he knew that the Synthetic Collective was still trying to understand what emotions were supposed to feel like. But most importantly, Kim Tae-ho knew that almost everyone in this room thought humans were weak. The galaxy saw Earth as a young species that had only recently figured out how to travel between stars. Humans had no great empire, no ancient wisdom, no terrible weapons that could destroy solar systems. They were just a small group of mammals from a blue and green planet who seemed to prefer talking to fighting. This was exactly what Kim Tae-ho wanted them to think. The peace talks had been going on for 3 days, and they were not going well. The Kreth Empire wanted to expand into 3 more star systems. The people already living in those systems did not want to be conquered. 45 other species were taking sides and making demands and threatening to leave the talks if they did not get what they wanted. It was a mess, and everyone knew it. Kim Tae-ho had been chosen to lead the talks because humans were considered neutral, they were too weak to threaten anyone and too new to have old grudges with other species. It was like asking a child to settle an argument between adults. Everyone would listen politely and then do whatever they wanted anyway. The talks were being broadcast live across the galaxy. Billions of beings were watching to see if peace was possible, or if they should start preparing for the biggest war in galactic history. The pressure was enormous, but Kim Tae-ho looked as calm as if he was having tea with friends. General Vextar was getting more and more angry with each passing hour. His people had built their empire through strength and conquest. The idea of sitting around talking about feelings and compromise made his blood boil. He had killed more enemies in personal combat than most species had members in their entire governments. And now he was supposed to listen to a soft little human talk about sharing resources and finding middle ground. The general watched Kim Tae-ho speak about trade agreements and territorial boundaries. The human used small words and simple ideas as if he was talking to children. Vextar felt his temper rising like lava in a volcano. His claws scraped against the metal table, making sounds like swords being sharpened. Every warrior instinct he had was telling him that this weak creature was wasting his time. Park So-young noticed the change in the general first. She had been trained to read body language, and the signs were clear. The way he sat forward in his chair, the way his breathing got faster, the way his red eyes focused on Kim Tae-ho like a predator choosing its prey. She wanted to warn her diplomat, but she also knew that Kim Tae-ho had seen it too. Nothing happened in this room that escaped those gray eyes. The other delegates were starting to notice the tension as well. The Crystal Ilari began humming nervous songs. The Hive Queen pulled her smaller selves closer. Together, the floating jellyfish aliens began swimming in tight circles in their tanks. Even the shape-changing robots stopped changing and held perfectly still. Kim Tae-ho kept talking in his calm, quiet voice about boundary lines and resource sharing. He did not seem to notice that the biggest, most dangerous predator in the room was getting ready to attack, but Park So-young knew better. Her diplomat was not ignoring the danger he was waiting for. At the moment everyone had been dreading was about to arrive. General Vextar could not take it anymore. The small human in his black suit was still talking about sharing mining rights and trade routes as if the Kreth Empire was some merchant guild instead of the greatest military force in 3 galaxies. The general had conquered 47 worlds with his bear claws. He had defeated the Iron Lords of Kethra in single combat. He had led the siege of the Crystal Cities and watched them burn like stars falling from the sky, and now this tiny mammal from a backwater planet was lecturing him about boundaries. The red rage that lived in every Kreth warrior heart began to boil over. Vextar felt his muscles tense and his breathing get heavy. His black scales started to change color, becoming darker and more metallic. This was a warning sign that every species in the galaxy knew. When a Kreth warrior scales turned that dark, someone was about to die. Kim Tae-ho was explaining something about neutral zones when it happened. General Vextar rose from his massive chair like a mountain coming to life. His 7-foot frame cast a shadow over the human diplomat, and his red eyes burned with the fury of a dying star. Every being in the great hall suddenly understood that talking time was over. The general moved faster than something his size should have been able to move. His massive fist came down like a meteor striking a planet. The sound of bone and metal connecting echoed through the chamber like thunder. Kim Tae-ho had snapped back, and blood sprayed from his mouth in a bright red arc that caught the light from the ceiling. The force of the blow lifted the human completely off his feet and sent him flying backward through the air. Every alien in the room expected to see the human diplomat crashed to the floor, broken and defeated. That was what happened when anyone was foolish enough to challenge Kreth military might. The Crystal Ilari were already singing funeral songs. The Hive Queen's smaller selves were chittering about, calling medical teams. The floating jellyfish aliens were turning away because they could not bear to watch, but Kim Tae-ho did something that made the entire galaxy freeze in complete shock. Instead of falling like a broken doll, the human twisted his body in midair like a cat. His feet found the ground, and he landed in a perfect crouch that would have impressed any warrior in the room. His gray eyes never left General Vextar's face, and when he straightened up there was something new in his expression, something that made even the bravest aliens take a step backward. Kim Tae Ho reached up and wiped the blood from his split lip with the back of his hand. The motion was slow and deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. Then he did something that sent chills down every spine in the chamber. He smiled. It was not the smile of someone who had just been hurt. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. Park So Young weapon was out of its holster and pointing at General Vextar before most beings in the room even realized she had moved. Her military training had taken over and every muscle in her body was ready for war, but Kim Tae-ho raised one hand without looking at her, and she froze. The gesture was small, but it carried absolute authority. The silence in the great hall was so complete that everyone could hear their own heartbeats. The only sound was the quiet hum of the space station life support systems. General Vextar stared at the human he had just hit with enough force to crack stone. The diplomat was not only still standing, but he looked completely unharmed except for the small cut on his lip. This was impossible. Every species in the galaxy had detailed files on human physical capabilities. They were weak creatures with soft skin and fragile bones. They relied on tools and technology to survive because their bodies were not built for fighting. A full-strength blow from a Kreth warrior should have killed a human instantly, or at least broken half the bones in his body. The Ilari delegates were making high-pitched sounds that their translators could not even begin to process. The Hive Queen Thousand Eyes were all focused on Kim Tae-ho, as if she was trying to figure out what species he actually belonged to. The Aquatic Federation representatives were swimming in frantic circles in their tanks. The synthetic collective robots were running diagnostic checks on their sensors because they could not believe what they had just witnessed. Kim Tae-ho straightened his black tie and smoothed down his suit jacket. The movements were calm and precise, as if he was getting ready for a business meeting instead of standing in a room full of shocked aliens who had just watched him survive something that should have been impossible. His gray eyes were still locked on General Vextar, and that smile never left his face. The general felt something he had not experienced in decades: fear. The small human in front of him was radiating the same dangerous energy that Vextar had only encountered in the galaxy's most deadly apex predators, the kind of creatures that hunted in the deep space between stars, the kind that other warriors whispered about in scared voices around campfires. But this made no sense according to every database in the galaxy. Humans were a young species that had barely figured out faster than light travel. They had no great weapons, no ancient warrior traditions, no evolutionary advantages that would make them dangerous in physical combat. They were diplomats and scientists and merchants, not fighters. General Vextar began to realize that maybe every database in the galaxy was wrong. Kim Tae-ho took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and the massive alien warrior. The movement was smooth and confident, like a predator approaching prey that had already given up fighting. The human was still smiling, but now there was something underneath that smile that made every survival instinct in the room start screaming warnings. When Kim Tae-ho spoke, his voice was still calm and quiet, but there was something new in it, something that made even the ancient Cerebral Council beings of pure mental energy ripple with sudden concern. The words he said were simple, but they carried the weight of mountains. General Vextar, I believe you have made an error in judgment. The way he said it was not angry or threatening. It was the tone someone might use to point out that it was raining outside. But every alien in the room understood that they had just heard the most dangerous sentence spoken in galactic politics in over 1,000 years. The small human diplomat had just told the greatest military commander in 3-star systems that he had made a mistake, and somehow everyone in the room believed him. The general looked down at his massive fist, the same fist that had shattered battle armor and crushed the skulls of his enemies in 100 different wars. There was no mark on it, no sign that he had just struck anything at all. It was as if he had punched empty air instead of a living being. Kim Tae-ho was still standing there, still smiling, still looking like nothing more than a quiet diplomat in a simple black suit. But now every being in the Great Hall was beginning to understand that appearances could be very, very deceiving. Human reached into his jacket pocket and 47 different weapon systems immediately targeted him. Every trigger finger in the room tensed, every safety was switched off, every alien warrior prepared to fire. But Kim Tae-ho just smiled wider, as if he found their fear amusing. What he pulled out of his pocket was going to change everything. Kim Tae-ho pulled a small silver device from his jacket pocket. It was no bigger than his hand and looked like nothing more than a simple communication tool. But when he pressed a button on its surface, something extraordinary happened. A massive holographic display materialized in the center of the great hall, filling the space between the ceiling and floor with images that made every alien in the room step backward in shock. The first image showed Earth, but not the peaceful blue and green planet that appeared in diplomatic files. This was Earth during what humans called the Great War. Massive armies of men in metal helmets charged across fields of mud and poison gas. Artillery shells exploded like tiny suns, turning entire landscapes into cratered wastelands. Soldiers fought hand to hand in trenches filled with water and blood, while machine guns cut down thousands of their comrades. But that was just the beginning. The holographic display shifted to show cities burning under waves of flying machines that dropped explosives like deadly rain. Entire populations fled from advancing armies that left nothing but destruction in their wake. Ships the size of buildings fought battles on oceans that turned red with blood, and through it all humans kept fighting, even when half their bodies were torn apart, even when their friends lay dead around them, even when victory seemed impossible. General Vextar watched with growing horror as the images showed him things he had never imagined. A species that had fought wars so terrible they made Kreth conquest look like children playing games. Humans had not just survived these conflicts, they had created them, fought them, and somehow found ways to make them even more deadly. Kim Tae-ho voice remained calm and quiet as he explained what the aliens were seeing. This was just one war, General Vextar. Just one of hundreds that my species has fought against itself. We spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. We got so good at it that we nearly destroyed our entire planet 3 different times. The hologram changed, again showing weapons that made every alien in the room feel sick to their stomachs. Bombs that could turn entire cities into glass diseases. Created in laboratories that could kill millions. Machines that could think for themselves and decide who lived and who died. Gas that could strip the flesh from bones. Radiation that could poison the land for centuries. But the most terrifying thing was not the weapons themselves, it was the humans who used them. The images showed soldiers who kept fighting even after they were wounded beyond what should have been possible. Pilots who flew their burning aircraft into enemy targets rather than surrender. Entire cities of people who chose to starve rather than give up to invading armies. These were not the weak, peaceful diplomats that the galaxy thought it knew. These were apex predators who had spent millennia learning how to kill everything, including themselves. The Aquatic Federation representatives were making bubbling sounds of distress in their tanks. The crystal Ilari had stopped singing entirely, and their forms were vibrating with fear. The Hive Queen had pulled all her smaller selves close to her main body, as if trying to protect them from what they were seeing. Even the ancient Cerebro council beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations were sending out waves of shock and disbelief. Kim Tae-ho continued his presentation as if he was discussing the weather. We fought 2 global wars that killed over 100 million of our own people. We created weapons that could end all life on our planet, and we came very close to using them. We have been practicing warfare for 10,000 years, and our greatest enemy has always been ourselves. The holographic display now showed human military capabilities that had been carefully hidden from Galactic view warships that could crack planets like egg soldiers, enhanced with technology that made them faster and stronger than most alien species. Weapons that could burn the atmosphere off entire worlds. But most frightening of all were the psychological profiles showing that humans were one of the very few species in the galaxy that could maintain organized fighting even while suffering catastrophic losses. General Vextar felt his world view crumbling around him. The Kreth Empire had built its reputation on being the most feared military force in known space. They had conquered dozens of worlds and defeated every enemy they had ever faced. But the humans had been fighting wars that made Kreth conflicts look like minor disagreements. And they had been doing it for thousands of years before the Kreth had even discovered fire. The reason we preferred diplomacy, General Kim Tae-ho said, and his smile was now absolutely terrifying, is not because we fear war. It is because we know exactly what war looks like. We have seen what happens when an entire species decides to stop talking and start killing, and we decided we were tired of it, but that does not mean we have forgotten how to fight. Park So-young stepped forward, and now every alien in the room could see that she was not just a young military officer. She moved like a trained killer, her every gesture precise and controlled. Behind her, the chamber's security screens lit up with incoming signals. Human ships had been quietly positioning themselves around the station for weeks, hidden in asteroid fields and gas clouds and the shadows of moons. Not an invasion force, but a clear message that Earth had not come to these negotiations unprepared. The other delegates began to understand that they had completely misread humanity's position in galactic politics. The humans were not weak newcomers seeking protection from stronger species. They were apex predators who had temporarily chosen to play by civilized rules. The galaxy had been making the same mistake that a rabbit might make when it sees a sleeping tiger and assumes the tiger must be harmless. Kim Tae-ho walked closer to General Vex-Tar, and with each step the massive alien warrior found himself wanting to back away. This small human in his simple black suit was radiating danger like heat from a fire. The diplomat was no longer bothering to hide what he really was, and what he really was made every survival instinct in the room start screaming. "You hit me, General Vex-Tar," Kim Tae-ho said, and touched the small cut on his lip where blood had already stopped flowing. "That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was assuming that because I did not hit you back, I must be weak. Your third mistake was not understanding that when a human smiles after you hurt them, it means they have just decided to show you what they are really capable of." The holographic display changed one final time, showing something that made every alien in the Great Hall understand just how badly they had misjudged the human species. It showed Earth population statistics: 6 billion humans. All of them descendants of survivors who had clawed their way to the top of the food chain on a planet that seemed designed to kill its inhabitants. And in the background of every image were humans doing something that no other species in the galaxy had ever seen. They were smiling. Kim Tae-ho gestured toward the holographic display that still filled the center of the Great Hall with images of human warfare. The pictures had changed again, showing Earth itself, but not the peaceful world that most aliens imagined. Instead, they saw a planet covered in extreme weather patterns, hurricanes that could level entire cities, earthquakes that split continents in half, volcanoes that could change the climate of the entire world, ice ages that lasted for thousands of years and forced every living thing to adapt or die. "This is our home planet," General Vex-Tar Kim Tae-ho said, and his voice carried a pride that made every alien in the room feel cold. "Our world tries to kill us every single day. It sends storms that can tear apart mountains. It shakes the ground beneath our feet without warning. It freezes us, burns us, floods us, and starves us. And we not only survived all of that, we learned to love it." The images showed humans doing things that seemed impossible to every other species. Present climbing mountains in weather that would kill most aliens instantly, swimming in oceans during storms that could sink warships, running marathons through deserts that had temperatures hot enough to melt metal, living in places where the very air was thin enough to suffocate most galactic species. But the most shocking thing was not that humans could survive in these conditions, it was that they chose to. Many of the images showed humans deliberately seeking out the most dangerous places on their planet just for fun. They climbed the highest peaks, dove to the deepest ocean floors, and explored places where one mistake would mean instant death. And they did it with those same terrifying smiles on their faces. General Vex-Tar was beginning to understand something that made his blood run cold. The humans had not conquered their planet through technology or superior numbers. They had done it by being tougher, more stubborn, and more willing to die than anything else that lived there. They were a species that had been forged in the fires of a world that seemed designed to create perfect predators. The holographic display shifted again, showing human sports and entertainment. Every alien in the room watched in growing horror as humans beat each other unconscious for fun. They had combat sports where the goal was to hurt your opponent as much as possible. They had games where players ran into each other at full speed while wearing minimal protection. They had competitions to see who could endure the most pain. Kim Tae-ho smiled as he watched the aliens' reactions. We call these activities recreation. General, they are what we do to relax. We invented dozens of different ways to fight each other, and then we made them into entertainment. We have boxing where two humans try to knock each other unconscious. We have wrestling where they try to pin each other to the ground. We have martial arts where they practice techniques designed to break bones and stop hearts. The images now showed massive stadiums filled with cheering crowds, watching humans engage in controlled violence. The aliens could see that these were not desperate gladiator battles but popular entertainment that entire families attended. Together, children watched their parents beat each other senseless and then asked for snacks during the intermission, but that was not even the most disturbing part. The display began showing human military training, and every alien warrior in the room felt their confidence crumble. Human soldiers were put through experiences that would break the minds of most galactic species. They were forced to crawl through mud while explosions went off around them. They practiced fighting in conditions that would kill most aliens just from exposure. They were trained to keep functioning even when they were wounded. Exhausted and outnumbered, Park So-young watched the aliens' faces as they realized what they were seeing. She had gone through this training herself. She knew what it felt like to push her body and mind beyond what should have been possible. She had learned to fight with weapons, with her hands, and with improvised tools made from whatever was available. She had been taught to survive in environments that would be considered uninhabitable by most species, and she was considered a fairly typical human soldier. Kim Tae-ho continued his presentation, showing the aliens things that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Human soldiers who had fought for days without sleep while carrying wounded comrades on their backs, pilots who had flown damaged aircraft hundreds of miles to avoid crashing in populated areas, entire units who had held defensive positions against impossible odds just because they had been asked to. The most terrifying thing was the casualty reports. Humans have fought battles where they lost 90% of their forces and still considered it a victory if they achieved their objective. Other species would have surrendered or retreated long before reaching such losses. But humans just kept fighting as if dying was simply another problem to be solved through determination and stubbornness. General Vextar was a veteran of hundreds of battles. He had seen courage and determination in many different species, but he had never seen anything like what these images were showing him. The humans did not just fight when they had to. They seemed to actively enjoy the challenge of facing impossible odds. Their legends and stories were not about peaceful times, but about wars and battles and heroes who died fighting against overwhelming enemies. The Crystal Ilari were now making sounds that their translators refused to even attempt to process. The Hive Queen had gone completely silent, which was something that had never happened in recorded galactic history. The Aquatic Federation representatives had stopped swimming entirely and were floating motionless in their tanks, like they were in shock. Kim Tae-ho walked closer to the general, and with each step the massive Kreth warrior felt more and more like prey being stalked by a predator. That was far more dangerous than it appeared. The human diplomat still looked like nothing more than a man in a simple black suit, but now everyone in the room could see the predator that lived behind those calm gray eyes. 6 billion humans, General Vextar Kim Tae-ho said, and let that number hang in the air like a threat. 6 billion descendants of the toughest, most adaptable, most stubborn survivors that evolution has ever produced. We are the children of beings who looked at a planet that was actively trying to kill them and decided to not only survive, but to thrive. We turned a death world into a garden, and we did it by being more dangerous than anything else that lived there. The holographic display now showed human population centers, and every alien in the room could see that they were not the peaceful cities they had expected. These were massive hives of activity where millions of humans lived and worked and raised families while constantly preparing for the next challenge. Earth cities had disaster shelters and emergency systems and backup plans for problems that most species had never even imagined, and in every image the humans were still smiling, those terrifying, confident smiles that said they were ready for whatever the universe wanted to throw at them. Kim Tae-ho touched the small cut on his lip again, and when he spoke every word carried the weight of 6 billion apex predators who had decided to try being civilized for a while. You wanted to know what humans are really like, General? Well, now you know. We are the species that turned warfare into an art form. We are the beings who treat mortal danger as entertainment. We are the survivors of a world that makes you conquered. Planets look like luxury resorts, and we have been very, very patient with all of you. General Vextar took his first step backward in over 30 years of military service. His warrior instincts were screaming at him with a clarity that cut through decades of conquest and victory. The small human standing in front of him was not prey. He was something far more dangerous than anything the general had ever encountered in battle. The way Kim Tae-ho stood, the way he breathed, the way those gray eyes never blinked, all of it marked him as an apex predator that had been pretending to be harmless. The general mind raced through everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. According to every military database in the Kreth Empire, humans were a minor species with primitive technology and weak physical forms. They had no great fleets, no terrible weapons, no ancient warrior traditions that marked them as a threat. But the evidence floating in the holographic display above their heads told a completely different story. Kim Tae-ho smiled wider as he watched the realization dawn on the general face. That smile was becoming more terrifying with each passing moment because it belonged to a being who had just revealed that his entire species had been lying about what they really were. The galaxy had been negotiating with humans as if they were harmless merchants when they were actually dormant war machines that had temporarily chosen peace. The Alari delegates' crystalline forms were vibrating so violently that cracks were starting to appear along their surface. Their harmonic songs had become discordant wails that spoke of terror beyond translation. The beautiful crystal beings who had lived in peace for thousands of years were experiencing fear for the first time in their species' memory. They were realizing that they shared the galaxy with creatures who treated violence as a recreational activity. The Hive Queen massive form was shuddering as thousands of her smaller selves pressed against her main body. Her compound eyes were all focused on Kim Tae-ho, but she could not understand what she was seeing. Her species had perfect information sharing and logical decision-making processes, but humans seemed to make choices based on concepts that her hive mind could not process. They fought when fighting was illogical. They died for ideas that had no practical value. They smiled when they should have been afraid. The Aquatic Federation representatives were swimming in tight, panicked circles in their tanks. Their translucent bodies were flashing colors that indicated extreme distress. These peaceful beings who had never known warfare beyond small territorial disputes were trying to comprehend a species that had industrialized violence to the point where they could kill millions of their own kind and still consider it a learning experience. Even the ancient cerebral council beings of pure mental energy, who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, were rippling with uncertainty. They had seen aggressive species before. The galaxy was full of warriors and conquerors and beings who believed that might made right, but they had never encountered a species that had turned self-destruction into an evolutionary advantage. Kim Tae-ho gestured to Park So-young, who stepped forward with the fluid grace of a trained killer. She was young and small even by human standards, but now every alien in the room could see that she moved like a weapon that had been disguised as a person. Her every gesture was controlled and precise, as if she was constantly calculating the most efficient way to neutralize every threat in the room. Lieutenant Park represents our military general Vextar, Kim Tae-ho said, and his voice carried a casual tone that made the words even more frightening. She is 26 years old, and this is her first assignment off Earth by human standards. She is barely more than a child. But she has been trained since she was 5 years old to fight and survive in conditions that would kill most of the beings in this room. Park So-young stood at attention, but every alien warrior present could see the coiled violence in her posture. She was not threatening anyone, but she was clearly ready to kill everything in the chamber if her diplomat gave the word. Her hand stayed near her weapon, not because she was nervous, but because ending lives was literally her job. The general looked at this young human female and felt something crack inside his worldview. She was smaller than most Kreth children, but she radiated the same deadly competence that he had only seen in his most elite warriors. The way she breathed, the way she stood, the way her eyes tracked movement in the room. All of it marked her as someone who had been bred for warfare from birth. Kim Tae-ho continued speaking as if he was discussing trade routes instead of revealing that his species were galactic apex predators. We do not send our best warriors to diplomatic missions, General. That would be wasteful. Park so young is what we consider a standard military representative. She has basic combat training and minimal experience. The beings we send to actual wars are somewhat more capable. The holographic display changed again, showing human special forces in action. These were not the regular soldiers that had already shocked the aliens. These were humans who had been enhanced and trained and equipped to fight enemies that regular armies could not handle. They moved through battlefields like ghosts, killing with efficiency that bordered on supernatural. They fought in environments that would instantly kill most galactic species, and they did it while carrying wounded comrades and completing mission objectives that seemed impossible, but even more terrifying than their capabilities was their attitude. The enhanced soldiers in the display were not grim-faced killers carrying out unpleasant duties. They looked like they were having fun. They smiled and joked and treated mortal combat as if it was an interesting puzzle to be solved through superior violence. General Vex Tar was beginning to understand that the humans had not hidden their true nature out of fear or weakness. They had done it out of politeness. They were trying to give the rest of the galaxy a chance to coexist peacefully with them. The diplomatic talks and trade agreements and cultural exchanges were not signs of human vulnerability. They were signs of human restraint. The display now showed human space capabilities that had been carefully concealed from galactic view ships that could move faster than anything else in known space, weapons that could sterilize entire star systems, defensive systems that could turn asteroid fields into impenetrable barriers. But most shocking of all were the numbers. The humans had been building their fleet for decades while pretending to be a minor species interested only in peaceful exploration. Kim Tae-ho walked even closer to General Vex Tar, and now the massive alien could smell something that his predator instincts recognized. It was the scent of a creature that had never been prey. The human diplomat carried himself with the confidence of a being that had never needed to run from anything, because nothing in his environment was dangerous enough to make running necessary. We have been very patient with all of you, Kim Tae-ho said, and for the first time his voice carried a hint of something that was not diplomacy. We watched the Kreth Empire conquer world after world, and we said nothing. We listened to the Aquatic Federation make demands about territory that was never theirs, and we offered compromise. We sat through endless debates about trade routes and mining rights and boundary disputes, while beings who had never fought a real war lectured us about the realities of galactic politics. The general realized with growing horror that the humans had not been participating in galactic politics at all. They had been managing it like adults, supervising children who were playing with toys that could accidentally hurt someone. The diplomatic corps that Earth sent to these meetings were not representatives seeking the best deal for their species. They were caretakers making sure that the other species did not do anything too dangerous while the adults were watching. And now one of the children had hit the babysitter. Kim Tae-ho walked back to his small wooden table and sat down as if nothing had happened. The blood on his lip had dried to a thin line, and the bruise forming on his jaw only made his smile more unsettling. He straightened his black tie and smoothed down his suit jacket with the same careful attention he had shown at the beginning of the session. Then he looked up at General Vex Tar with those calm gray eyes and spoke in a voice that was once again quiet and diplomatic. Now, then, General, shall we return to our discussion about territorial boundaries? I believe we were making excellent progress before your outburst. The word outburst hung in the air like poison. Every being in the Great Hall understood that Kim Tae-ho had just reduced the most feared military action in 3-star systems to the level of a child having a tantrum. The general, who had conquered 47 worlds and killed thousands of enemies in personal combat, had been dismissed as if he was a toddler who needed a timeout. General Vex Tar looked down at his massive fist, the same fist that had shattered battle armor and crushed the skulls of enemies in 100 different wars. There was still no mark on it, no sign that he had struck anything substantial. But the human he had hit was sitting calmly at his table, waiting to continue their conversation about mining rights and trade routes, as if being punched by a Kreth warrior was no more significant than a mosquito bite for the first time in his long military career. General Vextar understood what it felt like to be completely outmatched. The human had not threatened him, had not drawn a weapon, had not even raised his voice. But every instinct the general possessed was telling him that he was in the presence of something far more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered on any battlefield. The other delegates were having their own moments of terrible understanding. The Crystal Ilari, who had spent centuries believing that their peaceful nature made them superior to violent species, were realizing that they shared the galaxy with beings who had mastered violence so completely that they could choose when to be peaceful. The beautiful harmonic songs that had always brought them comfort now seemed pathetically fragile compared to the controlled lethality they had just witnessed. The Hive Queen was experiencing something that her species had never evolved to handle. Individual terror. Her collective consciousness was designed to process information logically and make rational decisions based on available data, but the humans defied logic. They made choices that seemed to contradict their own survival instincts, and somehow those choices made them more dangerous. Instead of less, the Aquatic Federation representatives were having difficulty breathing in their specially designed tanks. Their bodies were designed for a peaceful underwater world where the greatest danger was occasionally running out of food. Now they were trying to comprehend a species that had turned their entire planet into a training ground for creating perfect killers, and had done it so successfully that they could afford to be merciful to everyone. Elspark So Young remained standing behind Kim Tae-ho, but now every alien in the room could see that she was not just a bodyguard. She was a statement. Her presence said that humans were so confident in their abilities that they could send their children to guard their diplomats in rooms full of the galaxy's most dangerous beings, and those children would be more than capable of handling any situation that arose. Kim Tae-ho opened a folder on his wooden table and began reading from documents as if the last few minutes had been nothing more than a brief interruption. Now, where were we? He said, in that same calm diplomatic voice. Ah yes, the Kreth Empire territorial expansion into the Aldara system. I believe we can find a solution that works for everyone. The words were exactly the same diplomatic language he had been using all day, but now every being in the room understood the real message behind them. The humans were offering everyone a choice. They could continue to play by civilized rules and find peaceful solutions to their problems, or they could discover what happened when a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting warfare decided to stop being polite. One by one, the other delegates began to reconsider their positions. The Aquatic Federation, who had been demanding exclusive mining rights to 3-star systems, suddenly found the human proposals much more reasonable. The Synthetic Collective, whose mechanical representatives had been insisting on territorial expansion, discovered that diplomatic compromise was actually quite appealing. The Insectoid Hive, which had been threatening to withdraw from the talks, entirely now seemed very interested in finding mutually beneficial solutions. General Vextar slowly sat back down in his massive chair. His red eyes were still locked on Kim Tae-ho, but the fury that had driven him to violence was gone, replaced by something that felt uncomfortably like respect. The general was a warrior who valued strength above all else, and he had just witnessed a display of strength that redefined his understanding of what strength could look like. Kim Tae-ho had not overpowered him with superior technology or overwhelming numbers. He had done something far more impressive. He had revealed that humans possess such complete mastery over violence that they could choose to be peaceful without it being a sign of weakness. They were not diplomats because they were afraid to fight. They were diplomats because they were so good at fighting that they found more interesting ways to spend their time. As the session continued, the atmosphere in the Great Hall began to change. Territorial disputes that had seemed unsolvable suddenly found solutions. Trade agreements that had been stalled for months were completed in minutes. Resource allocation problems that had threatened to start wars were resolved through careful compromise. Every alien delegate was discovering that cooperation with humans was not just preferable to conflict. It was the only rational choice. The general himself approached Kim Tae-ho as the day session ended. He offered what passed for an apology among his people, a formal acknowledgement of worthy opposition. The human diplomat accepted it with the same Quiet grace he had shown throughout the entire encounter. There were no hard feelings, no demands for reparations, no diplomatic protests about inappropriate behavior. Kim Tae-ho simply smiled that terrifying gentle smile and suggested that they continue their discussions tomorrow. As news of the diplomatic session spread across the galaxy, every military commander and political leader found themselves asking the same question. If humans were this formidable when they were trying to be peaceful, what would happen if they ever decided to stop being diplomatic? The answer, as Kim Tae-ho's split lip and unwavering smile had demonstrated, was not something any species wanted to discover. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson that day. Sometimes the most dangerous beings are those who choose not to show their true nature until absolutely necessary. And sometimes when someone hits you and you smile back, the smartest thing you can do is apologize very quickly and hope they are in a forgiving mood. Kim Tae-ho packed his papers into his briefcase and prepared to return to his quarters aboard the Unity station. Tomorrow there would be more talks, more negotiations, more opportunities to find peaceful solutions to galactic problems, and every being who attended those talks would remember that the quiet human in the simple black suit was not there because his species was weak. He was there because his species was strong enough to choose mercy.